In this video I'm going to be going through my entry for the original Mecha contest, which is a contest that's been running for the last few years where participants are invited to build their own mech. Now obviously it's been a while since I got around to doing a mech. I've done various robots recently, but various of you have been getting in touch going, when are you next going to build a mech? So I'm pleased to be able to get back to this. It's something I enjoy quite a lot, although obviously I've gone off on different tangents with projects in recent years. So in this video I'm going to be going through the build so far and looking at all the various techniques that I'll be using to put this together. I was a little bit too late to enter the Mecha contest in 2020. I think I found out about it a little bit too close to the deadline, but I was really interested to have a go, so I'm pleased to be able to actually take part this year. If you're interested, here's their website address, and you can see all some of the various entries before. And if you take a look at some of the past contributors, you can see some really amazing pieces made, so I think I've got my work cut out. So for this piece I've got myself some acrylic sheets in various thicknesses. What I'm going to be doing is cutting out some shapes for the basic shape of the body. I'm also going to be using various cast resin pieces, and as you may know from my previous videos, I've got loads of moulds of various different shapes that I can use to cast up various pieces. These are often things like yogurt pots and lighters, but that's really useful because you can sort of just cast up all sorts of shapes, and because the resin is quite easy to sand and shape, I can use those to create whatever shapes I need. So first off, I'm just cutting out some pieces in acrylic, and these are going to form the basic shapes of the legs. I bought this small sanding unit specifically for this project, so I knew I'd be shaping lots and lots of acrylic, so I needed something relatively small to deal with those small pieces. I just realised I haven't put a dust cover on the front, so there's loads of dust flying everywhere, so I better get that stuck on. I did struggle a little bit getting started with this. I always find it's quite difficult to begin a project if I don't have a very firm idea of what it is I want to do. And for this, obviously I knew I wanted to make a mech, but that can be very varied in its form, so I wanted to come up with an idea that I could sort of focus on. Now something that I've become obsessed with recently is Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a PS4 game. It's like an action role-playing game, sort of an open world thing, but it's really cool because it's about a post-apocalyptic world that's been taken over by robotic animals. And the idea is that there's an AI which is charged with terraforming the planet. And the way it's done that is to create lots of robotic animals that are sort of replacing extinct species. Absolutely love the game. If you haven't tried it, I really do recommend it because it's just got some amazing ideas in it. The robots themselves are really cool. But I really like that idea of an AI creating robotic creatures to fill niches in the ecosystem. So I started thinking, well, maybe this robot could be something that an AI has created. But I didn't want to just do something that would be from Horizon Zero Dawn, so I decided to try and expand the idea slightly. And as I was going through sort of reference pictures and things, I came across a picture of the Balrog from Lord of the Rings, and I thought, well, that would be quite cool. What if the AI was trying to create a demon from a myth? So perhaps it had read some stories from a past civilization and hadn't realised that the demon in the stories wasn't actually real, that it was mythical, and so it had gone ahead and tried to create a sort of a robotic demon. So that would be quite a cool idea, and so that's what I'm going for. So whenever I had a choice I needed to make in terms of the shape of the robot, I would just refer to this picture of the Balrog. So I'm not trying to make the Balrog itself, but I'm just using the basic idea of a demonic robot as a sort of a focus for what I'm doing. So I'm going to try and get the body shape to look like this, but what I also started thinking is, well, if it's a demon then maybe it's quite fiery, so that could perhaps be a very hot reactor in the centre of the robot. So that basic idea helped inform a lot of the ideas that I was thinking about. So I want to have lots of vents in it which can have orange LEDs behind them to give a kind of a fiery look to it, and to get some very intense heat in it as well. What I was thinking is I could use some fluorescent paint, which is orange, then aim some UV LEDs at it. That way you should get quite an intense orange glow. So that's the basic idea of what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm sure it'll evolve as I go along, but that's a good firm starting point for me to focus on. So there's a basic idea of how the legs might work. Now I'm trying as far as possible with this to actually scratch build all of it. I'm not going to say I'm not going to use some found objects here and there, but I'm trying to make the majority of it just built from scratch. So what I'm going to be doing is using some cast resin pieces in the lathe. The cool thing with the resin is it's very easy to work, so you can quite quickly and quite easily create shapes on the lathe. So this is something I've taken to doing for a lot of projects now because it's a very, very quick process. So what I'm trying to do is come up with the beginnings of a piston that I can add to the back of the leg. Now this is something that I have been putting together over the last few months, and it's sort of basically a cheap milling machine. So what it is, it's a Dremel on a plunge stand, as you can see. I've also got a cross slide on there, and also a rotating table. Now you can buy sort of mini mills, and some of them can be quite cheap, but some of them can be quite expensive. This whole thing I spent just under £200 on, which is actually cheaper than a lot of the units I've seen. Now it's not good enough to be doing metal or anything like that, but it is perfect for resin because it's so easy to work. So what I'm going to be doing is using this to mill in some mechanical detail into the resin shapes for this piece. Now I'm sort of slowly learning to use this. I'm just keeping things simple first off, so I'm just going to cut a very simple channel through the end of this piece as a first pass. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. I've got a nice level of mechanical detail on there. So what I also need to do now is cut out some brackets in the acrylic to hold this piece in shape. Also want to use some copper pipe for the legs as well, so I'm just sanding down the pieces of acrylic here so they can fit inside the copper tube. So going through my bits box, I've got lots and lots of cast resin pieces, and these shapes are specifically made to fit 15mm pipe, so that should fit quite nice on the end. Also drilling out some further resin pieces to add some more mechanical detailing onto the legs. So you can sort of see the beginnings of how that's going to look. Now what I also want to do is have some mechanical detailing on the joints of the legs. So I've made this piece on the lathe and also cut a channel into it on my little mill there as well. Now I'm going to need a lot of these, so what I'm going to do is make a mould of this piece so I can cast up multiples. So I've just got the piece inside some foam board there and just pouring some silicone rubber over it. Now I'll let that to set overnight, so now I've got a mould of that piece, so I can now cast up as many of those as I need. Right, so I've poured some polyurethane resin into the mould, and there we go, there's a cast of the original piece. So I can now just cast up as many of these as I need for the project. Now given that they're going to be on the joints, I think I'm probably going to need quite a lot of them. I've also made myself a little guide there just so I can drill into the centre point for any circular details. I've made sure to make all of them the same diameter, so I just make sure I get the centre point each time I need to. Something I've also done on previous projects is use some rollable from deodorant bottles, and these things look like ball joints. I mean, I guess they are ball joints, so they work really, really well for robot projects and sort of mechanical things. So I'm just going to make a mould of these as well so I can cast up some of these for the project. So I'm now turning my attention to some engine parts that I want to include for the robot. There's going to be an engine on each leg, and I'm also probably going to include a few in the body as well. So I figure I can make one piece and then again make multiple copies of it for the project. So what I've got is a large chunk of resin here, and I'm just using a chisel to start shaping that. I've taken to doing this by hand quite a lot recently actually, so it's a lot quicker and you can do curves and things like that much more easily, and because the resin's so soft it's just very, very easy to work, so I found this is quite a good method for quickly producing mechanical looking shapes. Now what I'm doing here is cutting an internal diameter on the front, and what I want to be able to do is put this aluminium ring on the inside. I figure I can put some mesh behind it and that will be a sort of a nice edge to it, so I can then have an LED shining out from the inside and that will shine through the mesh and hopefully look quite nice. Okay, so that fits in quite nicely there. So now I've got basic shape, I can now start cutting in some further detail to the piece. Just give that a quick polish on the polishing wheel, just to give it a slightly smoother finish. Right, so there's some casts of the ball joint. So I'm going to have one of those on the end of the leg where it meets the hips. And as you can see, that's where the engine is going to fit on the front of the leg. Now I need to do a bit more work to this before it's ready to go, but you can sort of see the basic idea of how that's going to look. So as I mentioned, I want to have some lighting inside it, so I need to drill out the interior so there's space for that to happen. And I don't want this just to be a completely circular piece, so I'm starting to drill out the underside on it. That's just to try and get a smooth curve to the shape that I'm cutting. I can then cut that out further on the bandsaw and shape it down a little bit more with the Dremel. What I've also made is this smaller piece here which can then fit inside the interior, so that way I've got some sort of mechanical detailing on the inside as well. What I need to do now is kit bash and add a few other bits on the interior of that model to add some further mechanical detailing. So I've got some various other cast pieces here that I'm going to glue in place. And skipping ahead a little bit, as you can see, I've also added some electrical wiring and some aluminium rod and stuff like that, just to sort of fill in all of the mechanical detailing. Right, so there's my finished engine. So what I now need to do is make a mould of this, and it's a slightly complicated shape, so I need to think a little bit about how I did the mould for this. So as you can see, I've got it sort of attached on the left hand wall, and that's just to allow the silicon to easily flow around the whole piece, and also for air to escape as I pour the silicon in. Right, so there's my mould. And there's some casts from the mould. Now one problem I had with this was I was getting air trapped in the channel, as you can see there, and what's actually happened here is the resin sort of got crunched in a little bit where there's an air bubble. But I actually quite like that. It looks like the metal has become crumpled, maybe when the robot's bashed into something. It's actually quite a nice accidental detail there, so I'm going to keep that, and it should look quite nice once it's all painted up. So I also need to start thinking about the waist portion of the robot as well. So I've come up with this, and as you can see, it's just some more acrylic shapes, and I've got some additional cast resin pieces on there, including one of the casts of the deodorant bottle I made earlier. So it's going to fit together like that. It's a little bit difficult to hold it all in place, but hopefully you get the idea. I also need to make some additional mechanical detailing for the piece. So what I've done is to make this sort of curved shape here, and I'm just cutting some channels into it on the mill. Again, I'm going to make a mould of this and cast up multiple shapes. I actually got the idea for this from Warhammer 40,000. If you're familiar with some of their Imperial Knights, you often see this sort of mechanical detailing on them. It's quite like the look of it. It looks a bit like a vent or something like that, so I thought that'd be quite a nice little shape to include on my mech as well. I'm thinking I'm going to include some pistons on this to give some sort of mechanical detailing to the robot's waist. So I've got these 4 junctions placed around the central point, and I've got these piston shapes with a ball on the end. So the idea here is as the robot moves, they can move in any direction. As you can see, that fits into that little port there. So what I need to do is make a mould of this as well, as I'll need several of these for the piece. So I've glued these pieces on some foam board, and I'm just making some more moulds. So that's the first cast of my vent thing, and that's looking pretty good. The mould for the piston's a little bit different from how I would normally do it. As you can see, I've actually got a hole going all the way through the mould. And the reason for that is that I've found that long, thin objects are actually quite difficult to demould if there's nowhere for the air to escape. So what I've actually done for this is to have this stopper in the end of the mould. That stops the resin coming out when I pour it in, but you then pull the stopper out of the mould before you demould the piece. And that just allows air to flow into the mould as you pull it out, and allows the piece to come out quite easily. I found if you don't have that, it's really difficult to get things back out again, just because there's nowhere for the air to get back in as you pull them out. Right, so there's my cast piece, and as you can see, that fits quite nicely in the port, and it can move however it needs to, so that's quite good. So I'm now just trying to build up some mechanical detailing on the waist section. Now this is sort of my plan for the whole robot basically. I'm going to build the basic form, kind of the skeleton in a sense, out of acrylic, and then I'm just going to lay on resin pieces to create mechanical detail. And I'm just going to keep adding detail until I come up with something that I like the look of. I think what I'm probably going to do is, once I've got the basic body form in a state that I'm happy with, I'm going to consider that to be the skeleton essentially. So what I'm going to do, I think, is wrap it in cling film. I'm then going to put some clay over it and start sculpting in some body panels over that. That way I can ensure that the body panels will fit what I've made. I can then make some moulds of those and then attach those afterwards. So there should be a sort of a multi-layered look to the robot. You've got all the mechanical detail on the skeleton, and you've got a sort of shape that could, in principle at least, move. And then over that there'll be some body panels which will add some, I guess, layers of protection for the robot, and also sort of give it its final shape. So that's the plan. So with this I'm just adding in some mechanical detailing on the waist here, and I'll continue to do that for the rest of the robot. Now I'm starting to think about the torso as well. So as you can see, I've got this clear plastic sphere attached to some acrylic, and I'm thinking I'm going to cut in some details to this white piece of resin and make a section here. This is ultimately going to lead to the head, so it's sort of almost a neck section, I suppose. Well, there we go, so it doesn't look too bad there, so I'm going to glue that in place. So I'm sort of now at a stage where I can actually start putting this together and actually get it standing. I sort of said to myself that once I had something standing I would make the first portion of the video, so we're sort of getting close to the end of this piece. What I've done is to screw the leg into this piece of wood, and I've added some screws in the waist as well to sort of hold that in place. Now this is one of the bits I find quite tricky, because you've got to sort of get the pose looking right, but obviously I haven't built the top of the robot yet, so I'm sort of guessing as to how it should look. So there's a degree of sort of risk here that if you don't get it quite right, it could actually sort of screw things up a bit later down the line. So it took me quite a long time to actually get this in a position that I was happy with. I think this looks pretty good. What I've done is to cut a piece of wood here. This is going to be like a rock or something that the robot's standing. I always think it's quite good to have a sculpture standing on uneven ground. It looks a bit unnatural if it's on a perfectly flat plane. So it's always good to have one foot above the other, and I've got a rock here for that purpose. Now what I'm doing is cutting out some more acrylic again, and what I'm going to be doing is making some brackets to hold some arms in place. So these are going to sit on the outside of the sphere like this, and then I can attach some arms to those. Now for the arms, again, it's just some additional resin pieces with some acrylic shapes cut to size. Right, so there we go. As you can see, it's got quite an aggressive sort of stance, and I really wanted to do that. I think there's a tendency with mechs to sort of have them just sort of standing there, not really doing all that much. I mean, I suppose the idea is they're these huge lumbering machines, so I guess they're not going to be that sort of animated. But given that this is supposedly, at least in principle, a demon of some type, I thought it should look quite aggressive. So it's got this sort of aggressive stance, and once I've got a head on it, you can well imagine it to be screaming. So I think that looks pretty good. So that's where we are so far with this. So obviously there'll be more videos to come on this piece, but for the time being I think I'll leave it there. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be posting more videos on this project and others, so if you'd like to keep up with what's going on, please do subscribe. Alternatively, you can visit my website, which is www.thedarkpower.com, or you can find me on Facebook. Just search for The Dark Power.